Well, joining me for more on this in studio is technology and cyber law attorney Dan Or-Hof, who is also a member of the Privacy Protection Council in the Israeli Justice Ministry. Dan, thanks for joining us. Now, of course, leaked recordings of confidential discussions are a serious matter, but now that we have it, one of the curious things about it is the fact that Nadav Argaman, the head of the Shin Bet security agency, seems to want to be opposed to using this tracking method. Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to argue the opposite. Why would Argaman, you think, be against using this this tool that was designed to track terrorists in the coronavirus situation?
Yeah, well, I don't think that it's curious at all. I think there are two major reasons for his opposition. First of all, you're talking about technology which is covert by definition, which is used for anti-terror activities. And of course, I think that Shin Bet, the secret services, are not very keen on disclosing information about the nature of this technology. And the second issue with the use of such a technology for civil purposes is that it draws controversy. And I think that the head of the secret services does not want to be in the midst of controversial public debate over the use of this type of technology.
Well, Dan, over the past couple of days, I've had a couple of health professionals, one just in the studio, who said that basically, given the severity of the situation, the threat of the second wave, Israel at this stage simply has to use whatever tools at its disposal to combat the coronavirus. And this tool apparently has been effective. So why not, despite the concerns, and they're real, invasion of privacy rights, etc., but at least on a temporary basis to use this tool?
Well, I think that no one doubts that the use of contact tracing technology is required. However, we see a growing use of civil technology in relation to contact tracing and the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic by multiple countries, by other countries in the world. Canada, for example, just announced that they will launch a civil technology, civil application for contact tracing next month. And this is just one example. And I think that it's time to ask the hard question, because the Ministry of Health is pushing towards using the Shin Bet's technology again. And it's time to ask them why. Why haven't they come up with a civil alternative?
Well, let me tell you that we've interviewed Ishar Shai, the new just recently on this program. He is the new Minister of Science Technology. I posed that question to him. He says, and I guess he should know, that even though there are programs in the works, there's nothing right now that matches this Shin Bet program for tracking. So that until that new system is developed, it has to. This is the logical alternative. I mean, do you dispute that? Do you see an issue with that?
Well, I'm not a technology person myself, so but I do know that there are, in fact, a lot of technologies available, both here in Israel and abroad, that could be explored and used. One of them was actually launched by the Ministry of Health here in Israel. That's the Magen application. The real issue is that the Ministry of Health did nothing in order to promote the use of this application, in order to have this application become a real substitute for the use of the Secret Services technology. So there are technologies, there are alternatives, and there are multiple choices, and a lot of scholars and researchers have presented the government with alternatives. And it seems quite odd that at this time, months after the pandemic has already started, and months after a great deal of countries are already using civil technologies for the same type of purpose, that the Israeli government would insist that there is no alternative.
I mean, what about the current law that is still being weighed that would regulate the use of this technology, enshrined in law? We should point out to the viewers it was instituted under so-called emergency regulations. So the High Court of the Supreme Court, or the High Court of Justice, has said it must be enshrined in law. What about, would that not be enough, at least for the time being, if these these protections against the misuse of this technology would be enshrined in a law that would be approved by Parliament?
Well, probably it would be the second best. I mean, if the government would decide to pursue this course of action, then, of course, the Knesset should be a sort of a watchdog in order to make sure that all the necessary precautions and checks and balances are put in place in this type of legislation. So we need to wait and see what type of debate and discussions would be about this type of legislation should the government reintroduce it. So I think that if there is no other alternative, and I doubt that there is no other alternative, then there should be a public and parliamentary discourse about the right limitations to these types of powers.
Now, I just briefly, since you're in an advisory capacity for the Ministry of Justice, there is a new Justice Minister who is bringing a different approach than his predecessor, who was part of, at one point, the Shin Bet Security Agency. Is there perhaps, will that be a factor in these discussions going forward, you think?
Well, I hope so. I think that as the Protection of Privacy Council has already published its position that alternatives should be pursued, and I hope that the new Minister of Justice would hear these types of messages and ideas and will promote the alternatives in a manner that would replace the use of the technology of the secret services.
Okay, I do think in some ways this debate is going to be very influenced by just the numbers that come out, perhaps even in the next week, as to the rate of new coronavirus cases. We'll have to see how that goes. Dan Or-Hof, thank you for joining us here on The Rundown.